Hello, Judge, and hello, my opponent. My stance in this debate is that prison should not be abolished. I'm well aware that our prison system is not perfect, but prison is necessary and it can be fixed through reforms. Specifically, reforms like increased education for prisoners to help them become positive additions to society upon their release. I will also prove that prison is a crime deterrent and it prevents criminals like rapists and murderers that can cause detrimental harm to society from being out on the streets. But first, I will address the claims of my opponent. Throughout my opponent's speech, he uses small percentages of groups to make large blanket statements about the group as a whole. Take, for example, when he uses the case of two Philadelphia judges accepting bribes to represent a commonplace practice done by most judges. There are 3,294 appointed judges in the United States. To generalize that statement and to use it to represent a majority of them is unwarranted and would be the same thing as saying that because some blacks are criminals, that all blacks are criminals. And to let that go unaddressed would be racist. My opponent does this again when he claims that prisons cut rehabilitation programs to pocket the money. He claims that according to the Alabama study, only 28% of inmates were able to participate in a rehabilitation program, but that study only referred to drug treatment programs. First of all, over 40% of inmates are in prison for non-drug related offenses, so they would not need to participate in drug treatment programs. My opponent completely ignores the fact that there are things like educational programs in prisons that are used more often. According to the Bureau of Justice Statistics in January 2003, which postdates his Alabama study, 52% of male inmates and 50% of female inmates participated in educational programs since their most recent admission to prison. So the opportunity to be involved in programs is there, and with more reforms, that could only get better. My opponent also tries to make it seem like the overwhelming majority of arrested citizens are the main source of income for their household, but this blanket statement again is just unwarranted. According to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, only 57% of inmates arrested in 2002 were working full-time prior to their arrest, and 29% were not employed at all, and 14.3% were homeless within the same year that they were arrested. That does not sound like the main source of income to me. My opponent points out the University of Massachusetts study that somehow shows that over the past 40 years, a 1% increase in the prison population increases the violent crime rate by 0.2% and the property crime rate by 0.17%. A major factor that is being oversighted is that the United States population increased by over 100 million people between 1962 and 2002. So of course the crime rate would slightly increase if the population increased by that much. This is why more recent studies need to be used. In the past 5 years, between 2008 and 2013, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, the imprisonment rate has fallen by 5.8%, and the amount of people sentenced each year has dropped by 14%. And these statistics way postdate my opponents. I do agree with the part of your contention too about extreme periods of solitary confinement being wrong, but that too can be fixed through reforms. But I disagree with the second part where you say that prisons are fueling mass incarceration. Prisons do not make the law that send people to prison. That is what the government and lawmakers do, so prison cannot be the blame for this harm. Now that those points are addressed, my argument is that reforms are what prison needs to make it better. Since 1990, evidence has shown that prisoners who attended educational programs while they're incarcerated are less likely to be returned to prison following their release. Studies in several states have indicated that recidivism rates have declined where inmates have received appropriate education. In Oklahoma, inmates that received education only had a 25% recidivism rate compared with a 77% recidivism rate for those that were uneducated. Furthermore, the right kind of educational program leads to less violence by inmates involved in the programs and a more positive prison environment. We should have educational programs for academics as well as social skills, artistic abilities, and teaching techniques for managing emotions. According to the RAND Corporation study, correctional education for incarcerated adults reduces the risk of post-release reincarceration and does so if cost effectively. A savings of $5 on reincarceration costs for every dollar spent on correctional education. And when it comes to post-release employment for adults, researchers find that correctional education increases such employment. Prison also solves for the harms of having mass murderers and serial rapists walking free in society and being able to prey on little children. Prison keeps these criminals locked away and unable to harm society. This is an educational debate with fiat, meaning that if the judge rules for the proposition, it must happen in real life. So because my opponent does not offer any alternatives to prison, I'm going to have no choice but to assume that if prison is abolished, over 166,000 murderers and thousands of convicted rapists will be released into society without fear of being punished or for committing these crimes again. Prison is necessary because it prevents this from happening, and it serves as a deterrent which is evident by the declining prison rates that I referred to before. When someone breaks the law and causes harm to society, they need to be punished.